colleague who's been with us since August last year. So the legal clinic, some of you may have more history with the folks involved than I even do, but started with a group of active volunteers out of First United Methodist Church near Thomas Square Park. And Esther Arinaga was an immigration attorney at the time, and a few of her colleagues there at the church had, and other colleagues who had worked at Naloyo Immigration Law Institute. I'm not sure exactly what the full name was. I think it had several names, but that was no longer around. And so there was a day where Esther was sitting with a group of social ministry volunteers from the church, and they were saying, what else can we do to support our community, including the heavy Tongan community that the church serves? And one of the Tongan colleagues said, well, a lot of people need help with immigration legal services that can't afford it. And even in our own church, there are folks who may be undocumented but are scared to come forward and really need the help. So that planted the seed, and that was probably in 2014-15 time period. And for the next 3 years or more, they mostly organized as volunteers to have weekend clinics and just spread the word about resources available in the community, including legal aid, who was offering a little bit of help in that area. But those church members and their social justice colleagues then decided to put some money, raise some money, and hire some weekend contract lawyers to help with these clinics, to help give people advice. And then when they realized the need was even greater, they decided, they went to a conference and that they heard that there's tens of thousands of undocumented people and low-income people in the state, both documented and undocumented, who can't afford immigration legal help. So they became committed. And around that time, the immigration policies federally were getting stricter and harder on the population. So they decided that they would turn this into a nonprofit, and they spent the next year really actively fundraising in order to be ready for staff to come on board. And that happened then in February of 2019, when I transitioned from helping them raise funds and being a consultant to being their first part-time director, really. Now I'm full-time. And so by June of 2000, by June, we got our own 501c3 status, our own nonprofit status. Before that, the church was really our fiscal sponsor and allowing us to raise funds quickly under their umbrella. And so then we became more independent, although the church is super generous in giving us free space. And so in August of that year, we're just over a year old technically, Esther came on board as our first attorney, and we were able to offer our own direct legal services thanks to her work. Wow. And then we got a grant. So there's 3.5 staff now. We got a grant to bring on a part-time program coordinator, Rissa Flores. She's a student, actually, an undergrad, speaks Spanish, and she helps us run our naturalization outreach efforts and with various other things. And then we were also lucky to bring on a half-time legal assistant, Leah, who had just graduated from the paralegal program at Capulani, KCC. I always get that wrong. Capulani, right? Community College, yeah. And she's now since gone full-time since this August. So we're growing pretty quickly in the 1.5 years or so that we've been truly established. And we have a fantastic board of 13 growing to 14 this fall. And that's pretty much the structure.
Yeah.
And so the history.
What's really interesting is the church was really the springboard for what is now, the legal clinic, which I think is really amazing. So you have 3 full-time employees right now.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And 1 half-time.
1 half-time. Okay.
Yeah.
And everything is.
We hope to grow to have a second attorney at some point next year. But as you know, it's a difficult economy right now. But the need is so great. And not only do we want to really help as many people as we can, but it's really tough on Esther to just be the only attorney that everyone's coming to for all kinds of cases, and she'll share more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so with everything that you guys are doing, what would you say is, and I'm sure you're working with all different kinds of, backgrounds, ethnicities. what would you say the average client is looking for?
Right. So I think in terms of our services, the most, the sort of the most popular or the most need is largely around green cards, like getting immigrant
See.
visas. So there are really two ways to do that. One is consular processing, where you petition for your family back who are waiting back in your home country, and we have a few clients who are in that situation. And then there's also something called adjustment of status. So that's where your family is here, but let's say you've married a non-citizen, a non-green card holder, and you want to petition for them to have lawful status in the country. So that's a very, especially in Hawaii, I think there are a lot of people who are seeking those types of services.
Right.
There's also a great demand for help with naturalization applications. So people who have green cards and have had them for a long enough period of time that they can go ahead and apply for citizenship. So those I think are the two most common services and types of clients that we see. But we also have a smaller group of clients who are seeking what I call the humanitarian visas. So we have a few clients who are seeking asylum. So that means that they came to this country because they were persecuted in their home countries. And so you can apply for asylum. And another type of humanitarian visa would be like, it's called a U visa, like a crime victim visa. If you've been the victim of a crime, you can actually get a visa if you cooperate with law enforcement. And then there's a trafficking visa as well called the T visa. So we have fewer clients for those types of visas, but they do exist. I think there's trafficking on the island. And I'm starting to kind of hear more and more stories from people coming forward to talk about trafficking and how they were trafficked here, as well as asylum cases. Particularly, I think there's quite a few on the Big Island.
Wow.
Because they are coming from some of the Central American countries and coming to Hawaii. They have agricultural backgrounds, so they are able to find agricultural jobs there. And then they also have family members who came here earlier. So we have a few of those. And then the other type of client or service that I provide is deportation defense.
Oh,
So
wow.
someone is arrested by ICE for being undocumented or for being otherwise removable from the country. A lot of times, or increasingly, I've been getting more and more calls from people who need a lawyer to represent them in their court proceedings in front of the immigration judge. And those cases are very rewarding when they go well, but
Yeah, sure.
yeah, so I think those are the main types of service or clients that come to us. There's also people who just need help with a little bit more routine things like document replacement, getting a new green card, getting a work permit, getting a travel document, that kind of thing. So we help people with all kinds of immigration matters.
Such a broad spectrum, it's everything from,
Yeah.
it's citizenship, visas, and then the situation surrounding those visas, and then you have people who might be deported. It's such a wide spectrum. Yeah, and I'm sure, and being in Hawaii, we're the most diverse state in the country, I think by far. And could you tell us a little bit about, some of the backgrounds that you work with, and, how does certain, how does that kind of shape your work at the legal clinic? And what does that, how does the legal clinic, how does that experience, how is it shaped so much by Hawaii being a really diverse place as opposed to being in a really homogenous place?
Yeah, so Hawaii is incredibly diverse, and it has very diverse immigration issues as well. So, I grew up in California, in Los Angeles, and so there's this, Latino population is the predominant, immigrant population. Well, of course, there are lots of Asian communities like here, but
Right.
and then I lived in Maine for 4 years, and my husband was a professor at the law school there, so I lived there, and I did a lot of pro bono immigration work. And there, they had a lot of asylum seekers from different countries in Africa, like Somalia, Burundi,
Wow.
Rwanda, Congo. A lot of French-speaking asylum seekers. But then I moved to Hawaii, and I've definitely in this last year I've gotten this tutorial in an
Different
amazing
cultural
array of yeah,
pot. Yeah.
different languages spoken, and every group really has a somewhat different immigration pattern. So they have slightly different issues, or things that they need help with. So there are some immigrant communities that have been here for a while. And some of those communities are really, there was a huge sort of burst of interest in citizenship during the Trump years, because people who had held green cards for decades and had been fine with that suddenly realized, they might be at greater risk of being deported under
I
this
see.
administration. So
Right.
they became very interested in applying for citizenship. Um, we also, Hawaii has kind of a unique COFA community.
Can you say that
So I
again?
know that there are other places around the country that have COFA citizens. Um,
Oh, can you explain the acronym? I know that was.
oh, right. Yeah. So COFA stands for the Compact of Free Association. And it is basically a treaty between the United States and the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and
I
Palau.
see.
And what the treaty allows is for the citizens of those countries to travel freely to the United States, to reside here as long as they want, and also work here without having to get a work permit. So in a lot of ways, they're a lot like a green card holder, because a green card holder has very similar privileges. But in one important respect, they're not really exactly like a green card holder. So, I've represented a few Micronesian citizens in deportation
Wow.
proceedings, and basically a green card holder has more forms of relief from deportation, whereas in a deportation proceeding, the COFA citizen would be treated a lot like any other non-immigrant, so like a tourist, right, or
Right.
any other type of like a student visa holder or something like that. So
Right.
um, so it's very interesting to see a community of people who have been here, some of them since the 80s, have children here who are US citizens. And, for some, they're starting to become interested or ask questions about, how do I become a citizen? And, and so that's one sort of interesting group of immigrants that we have here in Hawaii, that they aren't as populous, I think, in other states. And then, I've come into contact with, you know, uh, recently a lot of Laotians, for example, who have told me stories about being sort of almost like trafficked into the United States for labor trafficking purposes. So that sort of seems seems pretty unique.
Yeah.
There's quite a, it seems like there's a lot of stories about people who are sort of tricked into um, giving up like their land or signing a contract and coming here expecting a job, getting a very low paying job, and then having their interests on, for example, like they would have to pay like a $50,000 fee, right, for this person, this middleman, to arrange their visas and transportation over here. And then every month their debt grows by thousands of dollars, so they're unable to work it off. Which is, I mean, technically that is a form of labor trafficking.
Right.
So I've been hearing more and more stories along those lines. I mean, so there's a lot of different, there's so many different communities, languages, which makes sometimes being an attorney here a little bit more difficult, because I can't just hire like one kind of interpreter. I need to have like a constant rotation of different languages. But it also makes it very interesting and the work very exciting to do. There's also a growing Latino community, which I've been getting more and more clients from.
And this is from the Big Island, you're saying?
Yeah, a lot of them are agricultural workers on the Big Island. A lot of them came over to the United States. They crossed the border about 15, 20 plus years ago.
So they've been here for a while.
Yeah, and I think it might have been at a time. I grew up in Southern California, so I remember there was a time when the flows over the border were just a lot freer. Like people went back and forth a lot more. They came for like a seasonal agricultural job, and then they went back, and then they would come back the next year. So we actually have quite a few people who came over almost decades ago and work in the agricultural industry. And unfortunately, I think many of them are undocumented. But then they've since had families here who are US citizens. So when I go to court for them, one of the things that I can do is I can try to persuade the judge that, deporting this person would, cause great harm to their family.
Right.
And their children, who are, all members of the community here, and try to get the judge to grant, to cancel the removal. So,
advocate that way.
Yeah. So those are just some of the different communities that I've interacted with. I think I looked at last year's, I sort of looked over my cases from last year. I think I ended up seeing people from about 28 different countries.
That's amazing. And you just started, yes.
Yeah. And there's a large number of Filipino immigrants. Some of them have been here longer. They have a longer history, I think, in Hawaii. And many of them are interested in citizenship. So, yeah.
So what's interesting is you're saying because of this administration and how vulnerable even green card holders have become under this administration, that there's a push for citizenship. I kind of wonder, because it's so diverse, because Hawaii is so diverse, do you feel like the culture of Hawaii is, in some sense, a lot more open to immigrants and a lot more understanding of the immigrant situation, because we're so diverse, and many of us, like me, is just like a second generation immigrant, and we understand the the plights of immigrant families that are hardworking, contribute to society, and because I think for this administration, the narrative that I think President Trump went on was that immigrants and people coming to this country are a drain on the system. How do you think the culture of Hawaii has really helped your work, as opposed to if you were somewhere else?
Yeah, I definitely think that because we're such a immigrant-rich community here, it's definitely easier to get support uh, for bills or even for fundraising for legal services to help lower income immigrants, because I think many of us here, like you said, have us either we are immigrants ourselves, or we're the child of immigrants, and we have a very close connection to our immigrant past.
Right.
I think again, I lived in Maine for 4 years, and it's different. I think there,
Totally.
um, uh, not to speak badly of Maine, but
Right.
um, uh, even I, as a native English speaker, kind of struggled to fit in there because the families who live there have been there for generations,
Right.
and I remember when I think it was the Somali refugees first started
Right.
to into Maine. There was a lot of conflict, and it was I think there was even like a documentary made about what happened in this one small Maine town. So thankfully, we don't really see that here. But I do think and I haven't lived here long enough to be like a first-hand witness to any of this, but I have heard stories from some of my Micronesian friends, for
Oh,
example.
yes,
There is
of course.
still, you know, they've kind of grown up hearing a lot of awful stereotypes and slurs like said to them. So I think no matter where you go, there will be a group that's unfortunately
Right.
marginalized
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And so, even though I think we have a lot to celebrate in Hawaii
Yeah.
because of our diversity and because of our immigrant heritage, we still need to be somewhat mindful that that there are still marginalized groups even here. So
Yeah, and you really see, an inside window, into how policy and how national conversation really shape the immigrant experience, and the journey that one has to go through in order to become a citizen or to get a green card or be free from uh, being deported. What are some of the things that you see? How has this administration really affected, as someone who's on the ground, someone who's trying to become a citizen?
yeah, so the the Trump administration for the last 4 years has made sweeping changes to
Right.
immigration law and policy. It's almost would take a book or just a huge project in itself to compile and document everything that they changed in terms of immigrant regulations, immigrant laws through executive orders. Uh,
We don't
I
have enough
think
time, right? Not
I
enough
think
time in the world.
yeah, I think it's always been difficult to be an immigrant. Like you mentioned, it's always been an arduous process. Um, and definitely there's always been, a narrative that, uh, paints undocumented people or immigrants who have committed a crime as, people we don't want here. And I think what's unique though about the Trump administration is that it took on a very direct attack on legal immigrants as well. So in the past, people were generally accepting of, oh, okay, you waited in line, you paid the fees, you went through the whole process, and now you're here legally. But Trump really kind of stood that on its head when he enacted this rule, a new rule called the public charge rule. And it was basically putting a wealth test on legal immigration.
Right.
So for a lot of my clients, because we only serve low income clients, this basically made it impossible for them to get a green card. Even though they might have jobs, they're hardworking, they have families, they have kids that they send to school, everything, but they don't have high enough paying jobs
Right.
to pass this wealth test that Trump enacted. Also, Trump made, in this last year, he made sweeping changes to asylum law, just making the standard impossible for an asylum seeker to succeed,
Wow.
at their claim. And yeah, I remember, being in a meeting of immigration lawyers after, that rule those changes went into effect, and just, basically lamenting that this is kind of going to put a halt to a lot of asylum cases. And then, of course, that the numbers of refugee admissions during the Trump years fell to almost nothing.
Right.
So, the Trump administration, under the quote unquote leadership of Stephen Miller, they knew exactly what to attack in order to decrease immigration. And they did it so successfully, actually, that USCIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Services,
Right.
is funded through fees, like application fees. And in the middle of the summer, they basically announced that they were going to furlough 70% of the agency's employees because the number of immigration applications had fallen to such a low level that they weren't able to fund their own operations.
Wow.
And thankfully, it didn't happen. There was I think Congress stepped in and temporarily, allowed them to continue functioning. But that just kind of demonstrates how drastically and dramatically immigration has been affected by Trump's policies.
Could you explain a little bit about the public charge rule? It's been around for a while, but it's, Trump kind of really, I guess, put teeth in it. Could you explain that as to what that is and how that really affected immigrants that didn't have the means?
Right. So it has been around for a very, very long time. And in its beginnings, it was really meant to exclude immigrants from Asia.
Right.
And the purpose of the rule is basically that the U.S. government, really doesn't want people to immigrate here who can't support themselves and who will go on public benefits. But Trump's new rule really supercharged it by basically making one of the, I think, most controversial aspects of that rule was making if you receive public benefits in the last, a year or so, that would disqualify you from getting a green card. And that was never part of the old public charge rule. And then they added, a whole new application where, you had to prove your educational level, you had to, show that you spoke English, which was, it's part of the citizenship test, but it was never part of the green card application. You had to show your credit report, you had to show that you had health insurance. And under the old rule, as long as you exceeded a certain threshold income level, or your sponsor could show that they could support you at a certain level, you were generally okay and you passed that public charge rule. But in the new public charge rule, you had to provide a lot more documentation, and the decision was now discretionary. So if you made 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, that would be a plus factor. But if you didn't, if you made only 125% or below, that could be a negative factor.
Right.
And yeah, so it basically put a lot of decision-making power in the hands of the USCIS officers. And it also made the decisions that they made harder to challenge because it was discretionary. So sorry, that got a little bit technical, but
No,
just
that sounds really good. Yeah, no, I mean, for us, non-immigration lawyers, and like I knew it was made it hard, but that just really kind of painted the picture. And it's interesting. I think about my parents. Many people I know in the Korean community, Korean immigrant community, they wouldn't have been able to meet that in the late 80s, early 80s, when there was an influx of people,
Right. My dad came in mid 1970s, and he told me that he was only allowed to take out like $200 of capital out of Korea because they had very strict rules about not wanting money to leave the country because they were developing at that time. So yeah, my dad wouldn't have been able to pass this rule. And I think that's the purpose. The purpose of the rule was to cut down on legal immigration. So a lot of the rhetoric, I think, around immigrants, especially in the past, was, we just don't want illegal immigrants here, right? But I think Trump really showed their cards, and it was, in fact, they just don't want immigrants, period.
They don't want anyone coming into the country. Yeah. And it really shows that, I mean, if you could afford it, if you could pay for it, if you can, reach a certain level, it's almost like value, right? What are you bringing to us, which is such a contrast to, Obama that enacted, DACA, and, that just was like a game changer. Yeah. Have you been able to work with any DACA people who are DACA, and what do you think, now that the Trump administration was trying to take that away, how does that continue to affect the national conversation?
So I have not worked with that many here in Hawaii. I just think because our population is smaller, there's fewer people eligible for DACA. I do have one client who was a DACA recipient, got married to a US citizen, and I'm helping them with their green card application for her. But having went to law school at UCLA around the time that DACA was enacted, I remember volunteering at these workshops at the LA Convention Center, which is humongous, and seeing thousands of DACA dreamers lining up, and to get assistance with their DACA applications. So yeah, DACA was it was a game changer in that it allowed undocumented kids to be protected from deportation, and that was a very so a lot of credit goes to the dreamers who organized and basically told their stories to members of Congress and ultimately the president, and got this protection for themselves, really. Um, but I think and maybe this also goes to your later question about like what would be the dream immigration agenda. So there are 11 million undocumented people living in the United States, and they
Right.
live in constant fear of deportation.
Yeah.
A lot of them, because of their undocumented status, can be victimized by employers, even victimized by their relatives, right? And I think the ultimate goal is to have comprehensive immigration reform and to give them, an opportunity at least to apply for some sort of status.
Right.
So I think that DACA is a good first step in that direction, and it did a world of good in terms of bringing the dreamers out of the shadows and allowing them to share their stories with
Yeah.
the
Without
whole.
fear.
Yeah, and I think sharing those stories, a lot of people, after they hear those stories, they start to understand or empathize with their situations more. So I think it was very valuable, what they did, for immigrants generally. But I think policy wise, I think we're all still waiting for, and hoping for more.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, it's like 7:40 right now. That kind of went by really fast. I want to open the floor to anyone that has any questions for Bettina and Esther. I am going to ask afterwards how we can support the work that they're doing. So hold that question. But if you have any thoughts or questions for Bettina and Esther, we'll start the Q&A now. Mary?
Esther, I was wondering, you were explaining the public charge rule, which I guess I didn't really understand before. But I was wondering, will the new administration, will Biden's administration be able to make, and what things will they be able to change back or change better than what we have presently under the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's something that, I've been sitting in a lot of meetings with immigration lawyers and advocates. And so that's always, that's the hot topic of discussion right now. So the way that the law works is that anything that was done by President Trump through executive orders can be repealed on day one by President Biden. Because an executive order is just exactly that. It's just the president had the power to say, okay, this is the policy. And therefore, when you get a new president, the new president can just say, okay, I repeal that. So a good example of that would be there is right now a ban on, there's an immigration ban on people who are waiting for like green card interviews. And I have a client who is here, but his wife and children are in the Philippines. And his application was submitted, and then the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and then this ban went into effect. So this family has just been waiting for their interview at the consulate or the embassy, sorry, in the Philippines. And so on day one, President Biden can come in and repeal that. The public charge rule is a regulation, and that one will take a little bit more time, but it can still be done relatively quickly. So anytime you have a new administrative rule or regulation, it has to go through a comment period where the public is allowed to comment on the proposed rule before it goes into effect. So I think in order to get rid of the public charge rule, probably have to go through the same administrative rulemaking procedure to undo it. So it might take, a few months. And I can't think of anything that was, so the hardest thing to obviously get rid of is anything that Congress passes as a statute, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So President Trump did do a lot just through executive orders and administrative rules, like the asylum changes that I spoke about earlier. That was all administrative rulemaking, so that can all be reversed in that same way. And then there's also discussion about, you know, because all of us immigration lawyers really want that public charge rule to go away, you know, as soon as possible. There is some talk, I think, of having an organization sue for an injunction of that rule, and then having the new Biden Justice Department not oppose the lawsuit, so that the judge could then just enjoin the rule from being in effect. So that's another kind of strategy that people are talking about to get rid of these rules quickly.
Deanna, you just have to unmute. Sorry, I actually unmuted everyone because when we're recording, your faces might show up to us. So, yeah.
I just want to thank you, Tina and Esther, for doing this. It's been a kind of a long struggle. And so Mary and I just remember we had a workshop at First United Methodist Church, and we did a rally at the immigration office in support of local attorneys. And I kept thinking, how can this be? How could this be? So I'm anxious to see how the legal clinic, what does, you know, their future look like, and what can the community do? But thank you. I don't know.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we appreciate your words of support and encouragement.
Deanna, you might be interested to know that there's a new coalition, or I guess a reconstituted coalition starting up called Hawaii Coalition on Immigrant Rights, HCIR.
All right.
Some of our volunteers are involved too, but it's just a coalition of groups like Pacific Gateway, Catholic Charities, Legal Aid, the Legal Clinic, folks all involved in advocacy around immigration issues. So that's also a great way to get involved. And there's monthly calls. People can.
Can you say that again, Bettina? Hawaii Coalition on
Immigrant Rights.
Immigrant
HCIR.
Rights.
Yeah. I believe
Just
there's
for
a
the rest
Facebook.
Yeah. Just for the rest of the members, Mary and I were reminiscing that Stan Bain, he called us into action one early morning in a week when it was raining in Kailua. And I said, what am I doing driving Palolo to Kailua? And we're going to stand there holding the sign for President Obama to resolve the DACA situation. It was pouring rain, and the newspaper reporters were there, and they go, we'd like a comment from you, ma'am. And I'm going, oh no. But it's just great to see how far this has gone and the work that's happening now.
Yeah. Hopefully we're witnessing something, the grassroots, right? The start of something that'll grow to be much bigger, continue to grow. Are there any other questions? Any thoughts? Lily, you need to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, I heard on the news today where, you know, the children on the Mexican border were separated from their parents, and there were thousands of children, I think, left in the US, and that now they were sending them back. How do they do something like that when they're alone without their parents? And, you know, it's one of the, it came on the news today, so I was thinking, oh, I felt sorry for the kids, you know. They probably want to be with their parents, but where are they, you know? So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most tragic stories of this administration was the family separation crisis. Mm-hmm. I think I read the same story today, and the judge had told the administration, you can't, not allowed to send these kids back by themselves. But yeah, I think that is actually another thing that I was reading, that the Biden administration plans, from day one to assemble a task force to try to find the parents of the 500 plus kids who were separated from their parents and that they haven't been able to locate their parents, probably because they were deported back to their whatever country they came from, while the kids were, placed in a foster home or something. So yeah, that is a really, really tragic story, and hopefully, our government is very wealthy, so it should put a lot of resources into tracking down these kids' parents.
Yeah, I think we can count on President Biden, I think, yeah, to get that done. Yeah.
I actually have one question. How would you say, I guess, in Hawaii, and for me, I'm very, I guess, pro-immigration because, my parents were two hardworking immigrants, and I have a lot of friends and people that are still on the journey looking towards citizenship, and I believe that they really are contributing members to society and have a lot to offer, but it's been really hard for them. Can you tell us a little bit about what, the benefits of immigration and, what immigration does for the country and for the economy? Maybe you would have, a certain perspective. Yeah, could you speak on that?
Yeah, I was just reading on Twitter the other day about there's this writer journalist named Matthew Iglesias, and he wrote or just published a book called 1 Billion Americans, where he proposes that we basically allow or try to, get as much immigration into this country as we can. I'll go back to, again, I lived in Maine for 4 years, and it was a very interesting state to live in. It is the oldest state in the United States, and this is a bit of trivia. It's also the whitest state, but that's not relevant here. But the aging of that population was very interesting to observe. And in a lot of developed countries like Germany, Japan, and increasingly the United States, the birth rate is dropping relative to the aging of the population. And when that happens, if you talk to people who are policy professors and people like that, economies tend to grow less slowly, you think about like the problems of not having enough taxpayers for to support some of the social welfare systems that we have set up. So this is kind of the wonky economist lover in me, but talking. One of the solutions to that is immigration, because immigrants do tend to be younger, tend to have more children. So from an economic perspective, immigration is actually very good for our country. And what I saw in Maine, was, I was a practicing lawyer and I went to some rural parts of Maine, and it was very, very sad to see, that there had been these towns that, especially in the northern part of Maine, that had once been thriving. But with the population decrease and with their younger generation increasingly moving to, cities like Boston and New York, and that these towns had completely depopulated, and they had closed their schools, there were no more services, that kind of thing. Interestingly, the immigrants who are coming from those African countries that I spoke about earlier, we're actually revitalizing some of those parts of
Wow.
that state. And some of them were farmers in their home countries. And they brought a lot of skills. Some of them were very highly educated, had master's degree. I had a client who had a business and a master's degree in accounting. He from Burundi, and he got a job, as an accountant. And so yeah, I think that actually the immigrants in Maine were benefiting the economy there. And then I think culturally, right, we've always sort of held ourselves out as a nation of immigrants, welcoming to the poor and the oppressed all over, and so I think, in terms of moral authority, we still want to have some of that, that we would be a welcoming haven for people who are fleeing persecution in their, where they come from. So I think, on a number of levels, economic and moral, I think immigration is beneficial to us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. I think that's, I think we need to say that too as part of this conversation. Are there any more questions? Well, an hour just flew by. I don't know about you. It certainly did for me. All right, last question. How can we support the legal clinic? And besides praying for you guys and thinking of you guys.
I have a long list. Always ready for that question. But I wanted to just add to your last comments, Esther, and the question about contributions. Here in Hawaii, we just now are wrapping up a new study on how immigrants are being disproportionately affected in Hawaii, and Native Hawaiians as well. But we focused on immigrants in terms of the COVID crisis. And it turns out that many of the frontline workers, especially home health care, staff, are immigrants. As many of you know, we import a lot of Filipino medical workers because there's just a shortage in the US. So Hawaii is very hard hit. As you know, the hotel and tourism industry is all fueled by immigrant workers, and they are hurting right now. The 12,000 members of our partner Unite Here Local 5 out of work. So there goes our economy if we don't get them back to work. So it's a significant part of our economic engine here, as well as our cultural life.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, because we don't have much time left, I'm gonna run through the list of needs we have currently, and I'm sure they're not, but not everybody can fill everything, but maybe you'll know someone who has these skills. Esther and I and our other colleagues at TLC have very little time to manage volunteers. So right now, although there's a lot of interest, we're really looking for some specific skills and time, some being very language specific to help interpret for some of Esther's client meetings. So we were looking for a Vietnamese translator or interpreter the other day. We don't have a lot of Chinese, Cantonese, or Mandarin interpretation support. Probably could always use a few more Tagalog, Ilocano speakers. And lately we've had this one Laotian person helping us out with the new clients Esther's getting. We do have a Spanish speaker on staff, and Esther's Spanish is pretty good too, but we can always use a few more. We also could use help. We took on a big CARES Act project, and we're down to the wire last 3 weeks or so of distributing a lot of Times grocery cards and Visa cash cards to help people in a pinch. And so we're doing a big mailing, hopefully on Tuesday at First United Methodist Church. We don't want to gather too many people, but we could take 1 or 2 more people to help us do a mailing of those cards. And that'll be probably at 4 o'clock or maybe earlier on Tuesday next week. We have a fundraising events committee that's going to be starting up. And for those of you who do like to be around very dedicated immigration attorneys and others, the history that we talked about earlier, we're going to be honoring Esther Arinaga in our spring event. And so we would like to put together a committee that can help plan for that event, and some other folks that we might honor. But As part of that, we'd also love to hear from anyone who has video editing skills, who can help us put together some montages, some video footage and photos. We always could use some dedicated administrative support, but specifically someone who can work remotely at times using our technology platforms and is willing to give a few hours every week for at least 6 months, I would say, at a time.
And this is for volunteer
graphic
or
design,
paid?
volunteer. All of this is volunteer
Gotcha.
so far. We're trying to save our pennies to hire a second attorney.
Right.
We could occasionally use graphic design skills. We could use writers for grants, reports, and our e-newsletter, which we don't get out very often. We need help with also developing content for our social media. And then once we can gather in person again, we will be putting on naturalization workshops where we assist, lots of volunteers help assist people fill out naturalization, citizenship application forms, and we offer a little bit of training around that, but that probably won't happen for a while.
Yeah.
So that was a quick list. Of course, we always can use donation, is very welcome. So those are my biggest needs. I don't know about Esther. She can probably use more legal help.
Thank you for that. That was very comprehensive, very practical too. All right.
Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention that everyone can do that would be great is to make comments. Whenever you see an op-ed or an article about immigrants in any paper you read or Hawaii News Now, often the people that take time to make comments are haters. They don't want immigrants, or they pit Native Hawaiians against immigrants, which doesn't need to happen. And so having some balanced voices on the comments, even the op-eds that Esther's posted, is something that we would love to see more of to help change the narrative in Hawaii.
Wow, what are the no, that's really helpful, because that's all something that we could do remotely. What are some of the op-eds? Were they in Hawaii News Now or Star Advertiser?
We often get picked up at Civil Beat because they're so friendly.
Oh, they're great.
But it's not even just things that we write. It's whenever there's like the public charge policy or the DACA announcement, suddenly you'll see a slew of comments. Just want to raise awareness of why we represent what we feel differently from what's sometimes laid out.
Yeah, that's definitely, I don't know, I guess shapes public perception. I know anytime Mayor Caldwell talks about the next tier or something, I have to read the comments just to see what everyone's feeling. So it's definitely true. So I'll definitely do that. All right. Thank you so much, Esther and Bettina, for your work. It's such amazing work that you guys do and so needed in Hawaii and around the country. But we're so glad that you are here and that you are starting this. And it's amazing that we kind of get a peek into this amazing thing that's starting, and we hope to continue to support you and root you and definitely root for you and to continue to volunteer and help in any way we can in the future.
Thank you for inviting us, Pastor. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk, and meet new people.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I can tell these are some cultures here that you have around. And thank you for everyone staying up late and listening for an hour. If you want to learn more about us, our website's thelegalclinichawaii.org, and that's where you'll see our contact information there too.
Thank you so much.
So thank you again, Pastor.
I'll put this on YouTube. On our YouTube channel, and our members can share it. We have a lot of members with young kids too, so they can tune in later on. I want to close in a word of prayer, and then we'll end. Dear Lord, we thank you so much again for the Legal Clinic, for their time with us. We see a closer look at what they're doing. I pray that you would strengthen them, just continue to raise people that are convicted, that really feel for the work that they're doing and want to support. Lord, I pray that you would continue to move people to volunteer and to help support in ways that are helpful and needed at this time for the Legal Clinic. We pray that we'd all stay safe, and as this passes, Lord, you continue to protect us. So thank you so much for this, for their work and the time that we had. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you. I
very
wish we could
much.
have that with each of you another time.
One day. Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Yes.
Okay.
You have a beautiful site location, so I'd like to show up there one day when it's safe again.
The most
Happy
beautiful.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
happy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
See you.
you.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Joy.
Thank you. Bye, Courtney.